US media is reporting that the China Eastern Airlines plane that came down in March may have been crashed intentionally. US investigators say that flight data suggests that the Boeing 737 was deliberately put into a near vertical descent, a nosedive. Well, the information appears to have come from the US team helping China with its investigation into the crash. It was China's deadliest aviation disaster in nearly 30 years. The Boeing jet crashed in the mountains of southern Guangxi on the 21st of March. 132 people in total were killed, and this is the aftermath of that crash. Authorities said that the pilots did not respond to repeated calls from air traffic controllers during the rapid descent. Our Asia Pacific editor Michael Bristow explains where the information is coming from.
Well, it's not so a report so much as suggestions from America, from investigators in the States who have been taking part in the inquiry, looking at what the cause of this crash was way back in March this year. They have suggested, or leaks from them have suggested, that perhaps it was an intentional crash, that someone in the cockpit, whether that was the pilot or somebody who'd forced their way in, they're not saying, but someone in the cockpit deliberately caused the plane to take a steep descent, and they crashed into the mountains in Guangxi in China, killing 132 people, all the people who were on board that plane.
Well, this is how the Wall Street Journal is reporting the story. They're quoting a person who is familiar with the preliminary assessment of US officials as saying the plane did what it was told to do by someone in the cockpit. In reaction, China says that there'll be a thorough investigation. Here's the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson.
The Civil Aviation Administration of China has said that it will continue to maintain close communication with all parties involved in the investigation, carrying it out in a scientific, rigorous and orderly manner.
So that's the official government reaction. Here's Michael's assessment on that.
Chinese authorities are not directly they're not directly addressing this narrative. They've suggested that perhaps these are rumours. It's early stages yet in this investigation. It might be even 2 years before we get an official report. But there have been in the past few weeks some suggestions on Chinese social media sites that this perhaps was the case.
Now, this is not the first crash involving Boeing. Indonesia's Lion Air Flight 610, which was a Boeing 737 MAX 8 model, crashed in 2018, killing 189 people. A year later, an Ethiopian Airlines flight, also a Boeing 737 MAX 8 model, crashed. 157 people were killed. Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes were then grounded. Let's get more on this. Alex Macheras is an aviation analyst. And Alex, I want to talk about the models, the Boeing models in just a moment, but I just want to focus in on what the Wall Street Journal are saying. They're quoting someone who is close to this initial investigation as saying that the plane did what it was told to do by someone in the cockpit. What do you read into that?
Good afternoon. Well, you're right. I think the focus first has to be recognizing that so far it is only the Wall Street Journal who are citing a person who is allegedly directly familiar with the findings of this initial investigation. And the reason, of course, the US are even involved in the first place is because although this was a domestic Chinese flight, the aircraft was manufactured by Boeing, of course, Boeing American. And so the US has been assisting China in these weeks that have followed this crash, which occurred in late March. What the Wall Street Journal are saying, if we point to that for the moment, is that the data suggests that somebody specifically input either data or also was ultimately at the controls of the Boeing 737 that was operating what was ultimately an uneventful flight until it entered this near vertical nosedive. And of course, if this does turn out to be the case, it almost clarifies or confirms the fears that many had in the aviation sector, because thankfully air travel is incredibly safe and we very, very rarely see an aircraft suffer in such a manner. But the nature of this accident really did tend to point towards the fact that it did appear, if you were speculating, that somebody could have been at the controls. Now, of course, we haven't had any data to suggest that was the case, apart from this leak now from the Wall Street Journal, so we'll have to see how it goes over the coming weeks.
I wonder if you can elaborate on that point that you made, inputting in data, because we understand the concept of somebody entering potentially the cockpit, even though it would be good of you to just elaborate on that. But inputting in data, I'm sort of alluding to the concerns that were previously about the software issues that Boeing 737 MAX 8 models previously had.
First of all, I want to separate, just to be very clear, the aircraft involved in this incident was not a 737 MAX 8, nor does it possess the technology that was later found to be the cause of those two 737 MAX incidents. This is an earlier generation aircraft, a Boeing 737-800 in service all over the world, a stellar safety record globally. But in terms of inputting those flight controls in it and what that really means, well, the phase of the flight that this aircraft suffered this nosedive, it was in the cruise. And in the cruise, the aircraft is on autopilot. As we say, we have the data, the initial data from the flight data recorder, consistent with the data that was available online that shows everything was operating as normal. What the leak from Wall Street Journal suggests is that perhaps somebody ultimately told the aircraft to enter that nosedive, and that would really consist of, be it the pilots or an intruder into the flight deck, adjusting perhaps the altitude or the vertical speed in the aircraft, which is running on autopilot at that time, to change its altitude, to ultimately have the aircraft react in a dramatic way. Again, we haven't had this confirmed, but that's what that specific phrase that the Wall Street Journal have used is really alluding to. And of course, the other theory, which again, the Wall Street Journal mentions, because we know that there is no confirmation as to whether or not it were the flight crew involved. Perhaps it was someone else on board the aircraft. Well, we haven't had anything from the Chinese authorities to suggest that it was hijacked, for example. There was no distress call. There was no communication between the aircraft itself and air traffic control. And there are many different ways that a flight crew can let the outside world know that there has been an intruder in the cockpit, even without saying it via air traffic control. There are certain codes they can put in that ultimately declare a hijacking signal. None of that happened. What did happen was this aircraft was flying very normally until it wasn't, until it was in that near vertical nosedive.
Alex, it's really good of you to be so clear on that, especially in the differences between those different Boeing models. Thank you very much. Alex Macheras, an aviation analyst, joining us live. Thank you.
Thank you.